I'm with Shachar May from Israaid. Now, Shachar, what is Israaid?
Israaid is Israel's leading humanitarian aid organization. We do both disaster response and long-term recovery in communities struck by disasters all around the world.
When were you started and why were you started?
So Israaid started in 2001 as a forum of Israeli disaster response groups. And over time, we developed into an independent organization. And today we work in about 16 countries right now, and we've worked in over 60 since our founding.
Do you just go to a disaster or do you have to be invited to a disaster to go and help out?
So after disasters happen, usually the country will request humanitarian assistance. And here in headquarters, what we'll do is we'll see if we have added value to add to the situation. So we have some very particular specializations. We have quite a lot of expertise in water, sanitation, and hygiene, in mental health and psychosocial support, in health and education. And so we assess whether we can help in the situation, in which case we'll send usually a small team to set up of experts who can start making partnerships with local organizations on the ground and local communities and see how we can develop our response from there.
And which countries have you been working in?
So today we're in 16 countries, I believe, spread out all around the world. So in Latin America and the Caribbean, we're in Colombia, we're in Guatemala, and a small island called Dominica in the Bahamas. In Europe, we're currently working in Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. In Africa, we are in South Sudan, Uganda, Mozambique, Malawi, and Ethiopia. In the Asia Pacific, we're in the Philippines and India and Vanuatu, which is a small island nation near Australia. So really quite spread out all over.
Well, you're working in lots of places.
Yeah. So some of our responses start out as emergencies and then develop into longer responses. So for example, we've been in South Sudan since the country's founding, so almost 12 years now. We're in Ukraine since the beginning of the fighting there, so it's been a little bit over a year, but we've committed to at least the next 5 years. So it really depends on what a community needs from us, how we can help, but we're there wherever we're needed, however long it takes.
Tell us about your staff. What kind of people work for you at Israel?
So we have a pretty unique model here, which I think really makes us special. So we have our team at headquarters, which is, Israeli and international staff, a lot of technical experts in all different sectors. And then on the ground, most of our staff is local, which has a huge added benefit in the sense that the people who work with us are from the community. They know the community. We really work towards a community-led response. We're not coming in to tell communities what they need or how they should fix it. They know far better. And I think it really adds another layer of trust that the people who work with us are most often from the communities themselves. So in Kenya, for example, where we work with both the refugee community and the local host community, who often has even less access to resources than the refugee community. On our staff, we have both members of the host community and members of the refugee community. And so they know the struggles of the people they're working with. They can approach them as equals. They speak the language, they know what's going on, and they're really able to help us create a response that's in tune with the real needs of the community.
And what sort of impact has Israel been having around the world?
So we work in quite a lot of sectors. I think it's really exciting to see that in each place we work, the impact is really matched to what's happening. So for example, in water, sanitation and hygiene, where we're bringing Israeli expertise in water technology. As you know, Israel has quite a lot of expertise in water technology. And so, for example, right now in Malawi, we came after Tropical Cyclone Freddie earlier this year. And today we are in the middle of a borehole rehabilitation project. So in 100 separate little villages or towns, we are rehabilitating their boreholes, so their access to clean water. And some of these towns, the borehole was damaged during the cyclone, and in some of them, they just weren't functional before. And so you see people have access all of a sudden to clean water, which isn't just water. It's, Malawi had been struggling with a cholera outbreak. And so having clean water, having safe drinking water, absolutely changes the life of the entire village. In Kenya right now, we're breaking ground on a new borehole where they've been struggling with the worst drought in 40 years. So you have entire families living on less than 5 liters of water a week. And that's for all their needs, for bathing, for cleaning, for drinking. And so breaking ground on a new borehole, finding water there, it changes people's lives in so many ways. And it's not just having drinking water. It combats malnutrition rates. It lowers the rate of waterborne illnesses. Children are often kept out of school to go search for water, so it allows children to get back to school. Women and children are often at a higher risk of gender-based violence as they take long walks in the bush to go dig for water. So it lowers those protection risks as well. And so you see those things make an enormous impact. And then another one of our big focuses is mental health and psychosocial support. So for example, in Ukraine, we have a project in partnership with the Office of the First Lady, where we began by training psychologists in trauma care and psychological first aid, and then working to place them in hospitals all across Ukraine, which is something that had never existed in Ukraine before. And so now 60 psychologists have been trained, and they are working in hospitals across Ukraine, and they're providing psychological support to both to the doctors and to the patients and the families of the patients, which is, changing the approach to mental health across the country and making it a more central need, because we really do believe that mental health is as essential of a need as food, water, or shelter. So working here, we've been able to see so many different forms of impact that are often so holistic and have bigger ramifications moving out into the community and, changing the way the community approaches disaster and making it into an opportunity to really build back better.
So it's saving people's lives and changing people's lives as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's more giving people the tools and the resources that they need and they deserve to make the changes in their own lives. So we work to give the communities the tools they need. We're not doing, for example, search and rescue. We're not here to, save people directly. What we do is we work with the community to make sure that even after we're gone, they have more capacity and more tools and more ability to build their own resilience moving forward and to face future challenges as they come.
In a disaster situation, are your staff actually putting themselves in danger?
So we do pride ourselves on often arriving within 48 hours of a disaster. I was on our mission to Turkey, for example, earlier this year after the earthquake. But we have very, very strong protocols in place. We have staff who are responsible for safety and security. And so we feel confident always that anywhere we would ask our staff to go, they will be safe and they will be able to not fear for their security. But they are often challenging circumstances. We arrived in Turkey less than 48 hours after the earthquake had struck, and the conditions were difficult. We were on the ground, we were in Marash, right at the epicenter of the earthquake. But, I was with that mission, and I never once feared for my safety because I knew the organization really takes every possible preventative measure to keep us safe.
And what things were you personally doing in Turkey?
So in Turkey, we started off with immediate relief distribution. So things like hygiene kits, right? Often people lost absolutely everything. So even just staying healthy and staying clean and having hand washing as, in displacement situations. Often diseases that can spread very easily that wouldn't spread otherwise. So distributing hygiene supplies, distributing shelter, tents, sleeping materials, diapers for children and elderly adults. And that was the first phase. And then also expanding into psychosocial support and supporting people who had just, lost everything in the earthquake.
Were they surprised to see Israelis coming to help them?
Yeah. I think people were, above all, just grateful that people were there with them and came from far away to help. I think one of the most moving things for me in Turkey is even as we were walking through the destruction on the first day, every person who approached us to ask where we were from, ask what we were doing there, immediately offered us food. Or what? Do you need something to eat? Do you need something to drink? Can I get you anything? And seeing that even in such a difficult moment, people had just perhaps lost their entire families, lost everything they'd owned. People had the strength to, reach out to others and care for others and, be moved that people had come to be part of this recovery was really, really moving for me.
Were you happy that you went?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Being able to see an impact in real time and being able to meet people and be inspired by their resilience and their stories is absolutely priceless.
Now, your members must have seen some tragic situations. Do they need counseling and support when they get back?
Yeah, so that's something that we take really seriously here at Israaid. So we have full-time psychologists on staff as well. Wellness and staff mental health is absolutely part of our programming all the time, just like we do mental health and psychological support for, the communities that we work with. It's been really internalized into the ethos here. So for example, with Turkey, even while we were on the ground, I had 2 counseling sessions with our psychologists back here. There's always support available for staff members for anything they could need. There's always somebody to turn to. And the organization really does take it seriously.
How are you financed?
So we have mainly by private donors around the world, so family foundations, also institutional funding, grants, say UNDP, USAID. We apply for grants like any other organization. And donors from around the world who really love and support our work and want to help us keep doing it.
And it's exciting that they're wanting to give to these projects, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really moving in today's day and age, always, when people want to be involved and when they want to support good work and when they want to support other communities around the world, and understanding that, we are a global community at this point and we need to support each other through our most vulnerable challenges and our most vulnerable moments.
You're saving people's lives. Is this Israel being a light to the nations? And that must be exciting as well, is it?
I think one of the things that's so special about Israaid is that we take a lot of the knowledge and the expertise that was developed here in Israel. So like I mentioned, water technology. Unfortunately, we have a lot of experience with, PTSD treatment. And so from the challenges that we've had to endure here in Israel, being able to take those lessons and then bring them elsewhere where they can be of use to others. For example, after the 2011 earthquake and tsunami in Japan, we were there. Now, Japan's a hugely developed nation. You wouldn't think that they need humanitarian aid, but what they didn't have experience with was psychological trauma care. And so that, for example, was something that we could bring this unique expertise that was developed here, and we could loan it to other people and help them get through their darkest moments as well. And that, to me, is really, really exciting.
And that's just as important as actually giving finance and money as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I think, you can give people finance and money, or you can share your skills and share your knowledge, which I think grows on its own. And so it's like a gift that keeps giving, because as communities are better equipped and better prepared, they can teach others, they can keep putting forward this knowledge.
Now, Ukraine is still in the news and there's still the war going on there. Tell us a bit more about Ukraine and the work that you're doing there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ukraine was our biggest response to date when it started. We started less than 2 days after the Russian invasion. We were on the border between Ukraine and Moldova, creating a safe space for women and children who were leaving the country on their way to Moldova. Then we expanded and we started working with Ukrainian refugees, primarily women and children, and the local host communities that were hosting them across Moldova. So providing all sorts of support, both aid supplies, food, medical aid, child-friendly spaces, support groups for, mothers who had just fled with everything. And then we opened a humanitarian logistics hub right across the border from Ukraine in Romania, through which we were able to deliver something, I think the number is something around 4,000 tons of essential aid into Ukraine, into southern and eastern Ukraine, which at the time was the only active humanitarian corridor into that part of Ukraine. We reached over 35 cities with everything from, medication, medical equipment, things like ultrasound machines, hospital beds, food aid, hygiene supplies, toys for children, winter clothes, generators. And so we were able to deliver aid. In July of last year, we moved into the country itself and opened 2 offices in Kyiv and in Odessa. Our staff today in Ukraine is about entirely Ukrainian, which means that they really understand what the communities we're working with are going through, and they're going through it themselves. And they are an incredible, incredible team. I was there in January, and I cannot say enough how inspiring our team on the ground is. And so we're working primarily with displaced Ukrainian communities in Odessa, in Kyiv. We've started this mental health program that we work across the country. So we partnered with the Office of the First Lady to train psychologists to work in hospitals. When I was on the ground there, I actually was able to see the immediate impact of that. So while I was there in January, there was the massive attack on Dnipro, which killed 46 Ukrainian civilians on an apartment building in Dnipro. And we had psychologists already in the hospital in Dnipro ready to respond, who were there to support the families, who were there to support the doctors as they were dealing with this disaster. And then just a few days later, there was a helicopter crash near a kindergarten outside of Kyiv in Brovary. And so again, our psychologists were at the hospital supporting the families of the people who had been injured, and were right there and ready to respond already. So people didn't have to wait for help. It was already in place. Today, we've also started providing mental health care for the railroad, the Ukrainian railways, where railway workers have been working around the clock in the past 500 days since the war has broken out. And the railways are really some of the lifeblood of, keeping supplies moving, people moving, even the military response. The railways have been so central to the Ukrainian community. So we've created a program that's now offering psychological support for the railway workers as, they devote themselves 110% to helping people. We've also had a water program a year now in Mykolaiv, which is a southern port city in Ukraine, where in April of that year, the water lines to the city were entirely severed in the attack to Kherson. So the city's been without running water for over a year now. And within a few months, we were able to bring in reverse osmosis water filtration systems. We now operate 12 water distribution points throughout the city, offering safe drinking water to, I think, over 400,000 Mykolaiv residents that have access for free all the time whenever they need it. So our programs across Ukraine are pretty extensive. And like I said, we're committed to stay there for however long we're needed, because even if the war were to end tomorrow, the humanitarian needs will continue.
I imagine if you're a Ukrainian refugee, all you have is what you can carry.
In a lot of cases, yeah. I think there are so many, internally displaced and Ukrainian refugees that have gone to so many different places. Many people are, moving around between family inside Ukraine itself. A lot of people also, no matter the situation, don't want to leave their town. For example, we work in Kherson region. We arrived just after the end of the Russian occupation there in November of last year. So we arrived just days after the occupation ended. And we work in the small villages there that don't usually get aid. And when we went to visit, we were speaking to people, and many of them never left. And then as soon as the occupation ended, many more came back of people who had left. And now you have to understand there's almost no building in this town that was untouched by shelling. It was the dead of winter, January, -5, -6 degrees outside. And there wasn't a single structure that had all of its windows intact, right? And people came back. And we asked them, why did you come back? And they said, this is home. The area wasn't even demined. Yeah. And they were adamant that this was their home. The same thing when we were responding after the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam a few months ago. We provided water pumps and clean water to try and drain some of the houses that had flooded. And many people refused to leave their homes because even in this state, this is their home. This is where they are from, and they want to stay. And our job is to make that easier, whatever that means, and provide what we can.
Tell us a bit more about the work that you're doing in Africa.
Sure. So it's quite varied. In Kenya, for example, we've been working for about 10 years now with refugee communities in Turkana West, which is northwest Kenya. And it is the second largest, Kakuma refugee camp, which is located there, is the second largest refugee center in Kenya, with over 250,000 refugees living there, some of them second or third generation already. And so there we work both with the refugee community and with the host community, because the local community itself doesn't have access to some of the resources that, say, the refugee community would, say food aid or, water at this point. And now that country on top is dealing with incredible drought, the worst in 40 years. And so we're not only providing water support, but mental health support. We have programs that combat gender-based violence, for example. In Uganda, we also work in a Pellerina refugee settlement. And both of these see refugees, many of them from South Sudan, from Burundi, from Ethiopia, from around East Africa. In Mozambique, we support displaced people who have been displaced by conflict. Many like child-friendly spaces, giving children a chance to still be kids in the face of everything and continue their education. In Malawi, as I mentioned, we had an emergency response coming after the tropical cyclone where we were both working on cholera prevention. The country experienced a cyclone immediately after they had just been recovering from a cholera outbreak, a major cholera outbreak. And so we created oral rehydration points, which, if you can hydrate properly, you can prevent the worst. Mm-hmm. You can intervene and prevent the worst effects of cholera. We've integrated into that a malnutrition screening program where many people don't have access to primary health care. So in the existing cholera prevention points that we set up, we were able to add additional health aspects. And as I mentioned, we're also rehabilitating boreholes across the country in the most affected regions, restoring access to clean water.
What sort of stories do you hear from your team when they come back?
Oh, so many. And really, really touching stories. I can tell you some of my own, for example. When I was in South Sudan, for example, I was speaking to a girl in the displaced persons camp where we work and we operate there, a community center. And we had just started a program on reproductive health for teenagers. And this girl and I were having a conversation, and she was explaining to me how much the information she had received had changed her own personal hygiene, made her not embarrassed to go to school during her monthly cycle. She had been missing school until then, and had inspired her to be a doctor. And now she said she's committed herself 110% to her studies, and because she wants to be a doctor and help other people as well. Sorry, there's a lot of them. Yeah. They get quite emotional. Last year I was in Florida after Hurricane Ian. And in Florida, we were helping people who didn't have access to, say, insurance or who had physical disabilities to do a lot of the cleanup work or gut out their homes so that things could be rebuilt. There was tons of flooding damage. We're cutting down trees that had fallen on people's homes, for example. And we were at the home of this man, John Gray. He was a Marine, a former Marine, 80 years old. Actually, John Gray III. His father was John Gray. His grandfather was John Gray. And his house had taken something like 2 meters of floodwater. And we gutted out the house from the bottom up. And he insisted on working next to us the entire time. He went through all of the mementos we could save, everything we could save. We went through the items one by one with him. We saved what he could. He showed us all of his running medals. He showed us the plate he got in Jerusalem on his trip to Israel in his youth. And we spent 3 days with him cleaning out his house. And there was nothing like getting a hug from this man as we were done. And he told us that, hiring somebody to repair the house for him, or to at least do the gutting before so that he could rebuild. He'd had an estimate and it would have cost him over $30,000 that he didn't have. And with just a few days and a little bit of elbow grease, we were able to do that for him and make sure that he could continue. And that was just one of dozens of people that we met on that trip. So I think there are so many stories and they take so many shapes. And, anyone on our teams will have their own stories. And I think that's what keeps us going.
Why do you do what you do?
We are living in an era where disasters are becoming ever more common. And I personally come from a journalism background. And, I would see about it on the news. I would read about it. I would write about it. And I didn't want to just talk about it anymore. And so since working with Israaid, yes, it's bit by bit. Yes, you can make only as much impact as you can make, but it's far better than not. And people have all sorts of different ways to support. There are many ways to contribute, but for me, I really believe that people everywhere deserve, the kindness and the leg up in their hardest moments. And my way to support is by being a part of this organization and speaking about the work we do and giving a voice to the communities that we work with.
Are you making a huge difference in the world community?
I hope so. I hope I can make a huge difference for one person at a time. And, you change a life, you change the world.
What's your prayer for your hope for the future of Israel?
We're in a period of big expansion where it's been really inspiring to see our impact grow and deepen across the world. My hope for Israel is that we can continue doing this work and inspiring other people to do this work, and that we can just continue learning from the communities that we work with and offering them all that we have to offer them, and that, the rest of the world sees it and joins us.
What's your website, Facebook page for people who'd like to know more?
Yeah, www.israaid.org. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just look up Israaid with 2 A's, ISRAAID.
Okay, Shachar, thank you much.
Thank you very much.